Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Orisa Lutsevich, and I'm the head of Ukraine Forum at Chatham House, that is part of Russia and Eurasia program. I'm pleased to welcome you today to our event. I would like to announce that this event is on the record and it's being recorded for later sharing among our networks. And it's also being interpreted into Ukrainian. Тому для учасників, які хочуть слухати українською, можна перемкнутися в перекладі в Zoom, and you will be able to access this event in Ukrainian. So welcome to all of you. Today, we will be looking at Ukraine's gender scorecard. As many of you know, Ukraine Forum has been looking at many transitions that are taking place in Ukraine, especially after the Revolution of Dignity. But today, perhaps we even can take a longer look, because Ukraine has just marked 30th anniversary of its independence, and shedding that Soviet legacy in gender equality is one of the markers of democratic transition. So I'm really pleased to welcome excellent panel of experts who are working daily on these issues inside Ukraine in very different sectors. And of course, we want to bring it into a broader perspective, so to say, outside of a gender bubble, because we believe that women can take a much more leading roles in making Ukraine a prosperous and peaceful country. They already do it, but there is a certain untapped potential that could be released, and that energy brought into more creative realm. We do believe that there is a certain dynamic between state and civil society on bringing gender equality more in line with the European standards, but also that Ukrainian women can take more forefront role in reforms, in bringing those issues that really matter for families, for citizens, for economy, for security of Ukraine. So I will be introducing and telling a little bit more about our speakers in the order that they will be presenting, but just to welcome Olena Suslova with us, Andriana Arechta, and Natalia Mikolska. Our fourth speaker, Marina Badrina, is being delayed in the parliament, but she will try to join us as the session in parliament will permit. So the first person that I would like to invite to give us an overview is somebody who, if you ask who is the gender expert in Ukraine, you will hear Olena Suslova from all continents, because she is somebody who has worked over 20 years on this issue. She is a co-founder of Women's Information Consultation Center that was set up in 1995. She's authored more than 50 books. So Olena will be able to give us an overview of gender issues and progress in Ukraine, and really set the scene for our more deeper discussion across the sectors later on. Olena, over to you.
Thank you, Orisa. Thank you very much for the invitation to such interesting meeting. Actually, at the question, who are experts on gender issue in Ukraine? Fortunately, now we have many answers, and I'm very happy, because to be one means nothing changed in your country. Actually, I would like to start from this word we could hear very often about so-called gender champions. I don't like it, because I think this gender championship is not under the first result. It is actually about the last result. And therefore, it is important to see what we do. And this roundtable, for me, it is an opportunity not just to inform you, but also to think for myself about steps and about gaps, challenges, and successes. Really, many changes in gender area, in gender policy, we could see during all these years. The starting point of substantial changes maybe is the year 2005, when the law on equal rights and equal opportunities on women and men was being approved. However, I think more visible changes, more tremendous changes, more impact in this area started actually 2014, when Russian aggression against Ukraine started. I would like to tell at first about positive changes. First of all, we have many legal changes. For Ukraine, country of continental law, it is very important. I mentioned the law on equal rights and equal opportunities. Also, we have the law, what we tell it anti-discrimination law. However, many different legal acts that are no law in the sense of Ukrainian legislation, like orders, like other kind of legal acts, started to change it during past 7-8 years. And I will tell about these changes in the next positive area. It is the area steps and institutional changes. Institutional changes in the governmental policy. Gender advisors, Governmental Commissioner for Gender Policy, many other structures and substructures. It is the part of national machinery and gender equality what we really have. It is also followed by different national and local programs. Programs on gender equality, on domestic violence, on women, peace and security agenda. By the way, Ukraine already adopted the second national action plan, and some changes of what we included in this action plan, I think are very unique. For example, it is about comprehensive approach to security. I think it is important not only for Ukraine and not only when the COVID pandemic started. It is really one of challenges of nowadays. And we try to answer at all these challenges and risks and threats by this plan. Too ambitious? Yes. However, if we have no ambitious goals, we have nothing in results. And actually, I would like to emphasize also on increased awareness on gender equality. Social advertisement, media resources producing gender-sensitive products like Povaga site and Oze. Everything did some changes. At the same time, very often we tell that we have no visible impact or we have no visibility of gender issues in general. Why it happened? Because each of these positive changes has gaps and challenges. It is life, and therefore we see that one stage what we got will open more perspective and more challenges for us in our work. Talking about legal changes, I would like to emphasize that very often this law, these legal acts do not give clear vision and implementation. They have no whole circle. What could give opportunity not only to tell about some basic provisions, however, to, to build the system, what will have indicators of results, what will have some kind of responsibility for actions or for lack of actions. Talking about governmental gender policy, very often, particularly at local level, this policy has formal character. It is about law self-capacity. It is about lack of political will and practically full lack of resources. Talking about increased awareness, we have to fit general increased awareness about gender issues is parallel to increased misunderstanding of it. And not just misunderstanding what could be in our brain. It is very active and sometimes very aggressive misunderstanding of what we tell like different so-called anti-gender groups. It is very risky for country, for any country. However, for country in a state of conflict, it is much more risky. Stereotypes mixed with the lack of analytical approach to information as a result produces small and bigger explosions, gender explosions. However, these explosions are also very risky. If ask me about attitude of Ukrainian society to gender issue, I think it is very mixed. One of examples. Recently, we had Defenders Day. Before the Defenders Day, the presidential order changed the name of this holiday and added feminine and masculine ending to this name. It was unexpected somehow for many people. At the same time, it did some kind of polarization in society. However, I don't like to tell about polarization. I would like to tell about stereotypes, but continue to be. Usually in schools, Defenders Day was the day when everyone should celebrate boys. Not because they are future defenders, maybe they will not be, but because they are boys. And when the name of holiday changed, many chats in different schools continue to discuss what kind of socks they would like to buy for boys for the Defenders Day. Doesn't matter, is it with feminine and masculine endings. I think it is a very clear demonstration and manifestation of mixed character of acceptance or not acceptance of gender equality in Ukraine. Why? I think we have to, Orisa already mentioned some post-Soviet transition, what we continue to go through. And I think we have to go more to policy, what will reflect some very clear indicators, and not only indicators, however, and frame about these indicators. As an example, could be the European Institute of Gender Equality Index. It is a tool to measure the progress of gender equality in the European Union. It uses statistics and gives more visibility to areas that need improvement, and ultimately supports policymakers to design more effective gender equality measures. I think we have to follow this way. And these results, I hope, will be optimistic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. Thanks especially for pointing, that the devil is always in implementation, not just in energy policy, decentralization, rule of law, but also in gender. So it's in a way the predicament that many sectors share, partially because, like you said, of under resources, but also probably of ineffective government agencies, public administration in general. But that's one side of the coin. But I think also we'll now be moving to a sector that is very important because, as you've mentioned, Ukraine is at a state of war with Russia. Its society feels quite strong impact of that armed conflict that is taking place with limited intensity. But nonetheless, this year, I think the statistic is that around 50 Ukrainian servicemen and women died in Donbass. So, of course, if you multiply all the casualties and families affected by that continued escalation, it means that it's quite a lot of Ukrainians suffer. And there's obviously the gender component. And I would like to invite right now Andriana Rechta, who is a former servicewoman herself. She's visited Chatham House in 2018 with her colleagues when they were here in the UK talking about, I think very powerful project that was called Invisible Battalion, demonstrating that Ukrainian women are fighting alongside men, defending Ukraine, risking lives, suffering all the difficulties coming back into peaceful life after the front line. Currently, Andriana is a chairwoman of a Ukrainian association called Ukrainian Women Veteran Movement. It has around 300 members around Ukraine. It's an association. And I think one of the struggles that they have is to establish more equal opportunities for women in the armed forces, and also to support women being on the front line and then coming back to civilian life. So Adriana will speak in Ukrainian. If you need interpretation, do switch into the English of a Zoom interpretation. And I will like to invite Adriana. Будь ласка, слово вам.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Adriana Rechta, veteran of the Russian-Ukrainian War. Before the war started, I had never imagined I would be working to promote gender equality in Ukraine's security and defense sector. I had been in private business, as many of us at that time, but we were highly motivated to take up arms and defend our country. So we volunteered to join the armed forces. I participated in combat operations in Luhansk Oblast as a member of an assault unit within the Aidar battalion. Yet upon demobilization, I saw the entry in my military service record card that officially defined my position as that of a seamstress. I already knew a number of gender activists such as Maria Berlinska, and I decided to get in on the Invisible Battalion project aiming to raise the issue of women in the armed forces to enhance their visibility. Together with other activists, public officials, and gender experts, we started an advocacy campaign for making combat positions in the armed forces of Ukraine accessible to women. And the only thing for which I can probably be thankful to this war is that it gave a boost to women's visibility in the army, and in general, it brought the rights of service women and servicemen to the fore. In 2018, a law was passed that opened 63 combat positions for women in the armed forces of Ukraine. Of course, we still do not have true equality. To achieve it, we need to amend the constitution that, as matters stand, does not allow opening all positions in the armed forces of Ukraine for women and men on a parity basis. In 2019, thanks to the concerted efforts of activists, women and men alike, and thanks to cooperation with the authorities, girls got an opportunity to enter military colleges. Until 2019, for example, the famous Ivan Bohun Military Lyceum in Kyiv that trains future officers was inaccessible to girls. And whereas in 2019 more than 20 girls entered this lyceum, today in 2021 there are more than 100 girl cadets studying in it. I hope they will soon become good officers and craft professionals. Of course, we still have an issue of discrimination, of stereotypical thinking. The matter is that the leaders of the security and defense sector do not view the gender mainstreaming, ensuring gender equality throughout this sector, as a key cross-cutting component of and an important stage in the sector reform currently underway. There are still leaders who do not believe in equal rights and opportunities for men and women as a factor in building up a professional armed forces. As a result, women in the armed forces of Ukraine still lack adequate logistical support and necessary supplies. For example, it's only necessary 8 years into the war that the technical specifications have been developed for manufacturing underwear and uniforms tailored for service women. But again, those exist only on paper as technical specifications. Girls and women in the armed forces of Ukraine do not have the underwear or uniforms fit for purpose, let alone body armor or other equipment designed with due regard to specifics of female bodies. Speaking about the introduction of gender-sensitive policies and practices in the armed forces of Ukraine, I should note that the current medical reform also seems to be blind to the needs of women in the army. For instance, Gynecological services are still unavailable, as are services related to the reproductive health of both men and women. In fact, today, the share of women in the armed forces of Ukraine is one of the highest ever. According to the register administered by the Ministry of Veterans Affairs, there are about 57,000 active servicemen and 19,402 women war veterans who have the combatant status. So far, we have no electronic register of veterans, though. Women still face barriers to career advancement and to professional development and training. When it comes to career growth, women, often due to their commanders' stereotypical and discriminatory attitude, cannot achieve the level of professional accomplishment and self-fulfillment in the armed forces of Ukraine, which they deserve, and for which they have sufficient talent and skills. That is why there are so few women generals in our military. Although we already have several women generals with battle experience at top positions in the relevant departments of the Ministry of Defense. We are fully aware that gender mainstreaming and promoting gender equality in the security and defense sector take time. Women have to go all the way from soldiers to key decision makers. It's not just about appointing someone to a certain position of consequence. It is about systemic transition to a new quality through establishing proper relations with combat units, with commanders, through reforming relations in the army as a whole. But if the leaders of the security and defense sector regarded gender equality as a cross-cutting issue of the sector reform, I think the existing barriers to women's career advancement, logistical provision, and general well-being would be overcome sooner and more efficiently. And gender-neutral legislation in our country would become gender-sensitive. I won't talk today about military garrisons, community services there, and availability of childcare facilities. It is a woman's natural function to give birth to children. Yet, when it comes to the security and defense sector, people seem to perceive women's having children as a problem. That is, women with children allegedly cannot serve properly and excel in their military profession. However, no one seems ready to discuss conditions that need to be created for both fathers and mothers who serve in those garrisons to be able to raise children and develop professionally. We have a well-established armed force of more than 200,000 servicemen and servicewomen, but there is permanent rotation. The personnel keep quitting the ranks, and when a former soldier or officer returns to civilian life but does not find a place for themselves there, they sign a new contract to serve in the military. Our security and defense sector does not offer decent remuneration to its personnel. If the military service is a person's career of choice and person is prepared to dedicate 25 years of their life to this career, they should be well rewarded by the state for those 25 years. We women veterans are all reservists today, even though we joined the armed forces as volunteers. The aggression against our country, the armed conflict is going on, albeit with low intensity. So we reservists, with our combat experience, stand ready to return to the battlefield when the state needs us. We stand ready to defend our territorial integrity and independence again. We can say that due to the frequent rotation, the processes and procedures of recruitment and professional selection of both men and women are not being improved as necessary. We have a very high personnel turnover, and those young people, women and men who've served their term and have an incredible experience of 8 years of war, Do not share it with the new recruits. Do not pass that experience on because they do not return to the armed forces. The transition from military to civilian life can also be a problem in and of itself. Once you demobilize, the army is no longer interested in you. They only wait for you to sign the contract again. There are issues where the war veterans get in documentation to confirm their status. Because of the red tape, they have to sue the Ministry of Defense and get swamped in lengthy litigation trying to prove that they served at the front line, that they were wounded or injured and are eligible for their ex-combatant certificate. The Ministry of Veterans Affairs was formed only in 2018, and since then it has borne a heavy burden of making policy on social benefits, medical care and legal aid for more than 500,000 war veterans. And they've had to do it all quickly. Yet through the haste, we are losing a lot of people to PTSD, to aggravated chronic diseases. We still haven't got reliable statistics on the number of suicides amongst war veterans in Ukraine. At present, the Ministry of Veterans Affairs is, of course, cooperating with civil society organizations that have taken over many of the functions that the state should perform. And we also have to deal with what I called an inter-institutional conflict. We need good communication, coordination of efforts amongst concerned institutions, such as the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Veterans Affairs, the Ministry of Public Health, but such communication remains insufficient. Finally, I would like to address an important topic of sexual violence, gender-based violence, and conflict-related violence. In the 8th year of war, there is still no mechanism in place for effective response and counteraction to conflict-related SGBV. Now, and I'm sure Mirzelena Suslova will agree with me, the Government Commissioner for Gender Equality Policy and civil society organizations are actively working to create a mechanism to combat violence in the military and conflict-related violence. And if you ask me to assess the progress in gender aspects of Ukraine's security and defense sector reform, I would give it 5 points out of 10. Thank you.
Adriana. So 50% success so far, but I think it's good to have this ambitious goal, like Olena Suslova said at the beginning, because that ambition keeps Ukraine going forward, and that group of Ukrainian female veterans, I'm sure, will be a very strong advocacy for issues that you've mentioned that should be addressed. So Natalia is the strategic transformation expert and woman economic empowerment enthusiast, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of energy in that title. But she is, one of the, I would say rare, because I don't know all the statistics, a non-executive member of the state-owned enterprise. She is on the board of Ukrhydroenergo, that is in charge of power generation from hydro resources. So Natalia is a business leader. She is a former lawyer by training. But she's also a co-founder of She Exports platform and a member of Ukrainian Fashion Collaboration platform. She served in Ukrainian government right after the Euromaidan. She was the Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Trade, but also Ukraine's trade representative. So Natalia, over to you. How do you see this from the corporate sector, or maybe you have some of the reflections on what you have heard? Are there some similarities or differences? What stands out from your vantage point?
Thanks so much. I'm very happy to be here and to talk about actually the topic that I've been pushing in Ukraine for, I think, last 8 years. Actually, you know, the issue of women economic empowerment, or somebody call it like economic gender equality, although I prefer more economic empowerment, is not only the issue that Ukraine is facing, Basically, that's one of the biggest economic issues that the global economy is facing after the gas emission and some other, like global warming that people talking a lot. And actually COVID-19 and like all this pandemic and quarantine made this issue even, I would say, more urgent to be tackled or more urgent to be talked. Why is it so? Because everybody understands, and basically we already have some research, at least the one that I've got to see is the research that were done in United States, that COVID actually added additional 8 hours of work to women in a week, unpaid work at home, related to homeschooling, related to taking care of the home, disinfection, buying all this, I would say, disinfection kits, doing disinfection at home, and actually taking care of the parents, and of elderly. So what we have is that before, women already were doing 3 times much work as men at home, unpaid work. And now we received additional 8 hours. So basically they are, like doing the now, kind of the second job, or they had like taking the second, assignment that they are not being paid for. So in addition to the issues that we are facing in terms of the in terms of the salary gap that we also are facing in Ukraine and facing in the world, we now have the issue of how we are going to help women to overcome the crisis. And I call it push back, because COVID-19 pushed back all the programs and actually all the progress that were made in terms of women economic empowerment for the last 5 years. It pushed us back, I think, at least 10 years. So that's kind of a global perspective where we are. There were great research done by number of companies and researchers. For example, McKinsey was doing this global research, and they told that if we will engage women more economically, we would get 28 trillion US dollars plus to the current GDP. So if everybody is looking for, and that was the pre-COVID data. If we look at the actually situation now, everybody in Ukraine is looking this, they called it, like dots of growth or growth area. And I always say, look at the women in Ukraine. That's like the first growth area you can tackle. Because I really liked what Adriana told. There are a few very easy obstacles to tackle actually to get women to be more economically engaged. First one is infrastructure related to kids. It's preschools, schools, medical institution. Ukraine is among the champions, and I call it like the, not in a good way champion, but I would say, I even can say a loser in terms that we are losing our economic potential in terms of women staying in maternity leave. And not all the women are staying 3 years at home because they want to. Some of them are staying at home because they don't have the preschool, or they don't have a kindergarten where they can, bring their kids to. Some of them are not able to pay for the nanny, so they can look for their kids. And if Ukrainian government is also always talking now about that we have a lack of human resources, that's one of the easiest way to get these human resources like flown into the economy, is to create the infrastructure for women actually related to kids. There are a lot of other issues. There is this other, like I'm just like now trying to throw a few examples of what can be done now. There are also an issue related to stereotypes, because we together with Adventure Group and Gradus Research Agency, at the beginning of this year, we've done a research about small and medium-sized companies, and we asked whether women have ever faced the discrimination, or they felt that they are discriminated at their like companies that they work. And this actually surveys that we did, the survey was done within the top level executive at small and medium-sized businesses, and 38% of the women that were going through survey told that yes, they faced or they felt discriminated at the work at their workplace. 8% told that it's difficult for them to say. So, but all the people that are doing surveys usually adding this 8% to 38, and we are coming to not a very good number, basically. The other issue, the other question that we asked, and I think that that's a very kind of important like question, is whether the question was how many women are working at the top level position of your company. In almost all of the companies, the amount is like about 30 to 40% in terms of like the company survey. So what we have in Ukraine, in Ukrainian business, we usually have women that are working at the mid-level, but they never or rarely get to the top level. And there are like different reasons for that. One of them is stereotypes. And stereotypes actually is that, if woman is at the top level, she either bitchy, or she doesn't have a family, or she's not a good mom. It's still taking, roots from our post-Soviet mentality. The other thing that actually women are not supported. A lot of people in my surrounding, a lot of my friends are saying, like, you are wrong. I'm just saying, okay, you were lucky that you didn't face that in your career or in your life. But if you talk to the people, not in the big cities, but if you talk to the people in middle cities or in small cities, definitely what you will see is that like that they are facing this issue. The other issue is corporate governance, and I believe that's very important. Even in the world, if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, the percentage of the women in the board of these companies, it's less than 10%. If we look in Ukraine, this percent is even lower. As of today, I am the only female representative at the board of the company of Ukrhydroenergo. And everybody asks, like, why it's important to have women at the board? Because there are a lot of research that proves and shows that women at the boards of the companies are bringing not only sustainability to the companies, but companies are more profitable and more ready to face the challenges and risk. Plus, in my case, and I can say that as an example, I am, as a member of the board, pushed a special program for women empowerment in our company. And I now I'm happy to share the news that our company actually today officially joined the Women Empowerment Principle, the initiative of UN Global Compact and UN Women, and we are the first Ukrainian state-owned companies that joined this initiative, and will be pushing the women economic empowerment agenda in our company. So an energy sector, taking into account our post-Soviet mentality and background, is regarded in Ukraine stereotypically as a only, like male sector where only like men could succeed. So it's even more important to push the agenda of women empowerment in so-called, like male-dominated sectors, such as army, military, such as like in business, it's energy, and also politics in Ukraine is still regarded as a male-dominated, like sector. Why? Because look at the number of the ministers at the cabinet of ministers. If you look at the percentage of the women being ministers, then it's a very low. If you look at the level of deputy ministers being women, the number is at least twice or even like 3 times bigger. So what we have the mid-level being women, and we don't have so many women at the top. So just like to sum up, I think that we need to tackle the issue of women economic empowerment, both from the government angle. The programs of supporting women, especially after COVID-19 or in COVID-19 pandemic and situation, is very important, especially supporting women-owned and women-run businesses. Second issue is that we need to push the agenda of actually praising the companies that are developing and implementing women economic empowerment programs. Third, I think it's very important that women in business should praise other women for their successes, because unfortunately, it's not in the Ukrainian tradition, and also maybe because of that of the Soviet time, first to praise yourself for your success and to take loudly, like we've done it, we are the champions, but also to praise others, saying, like, well done, we are very proud of you, and I'm very proud of your success. So, like I suggest like today, maybe as an kind of outcome of our discussion is just like, so each of us just take, kind of a commitment to praise like 1 or 2 or 3 women in their area publicly, and to let others know about the successful women in different areas, and to lead the young women or young, girls to get them actually see these examples and to be inspired and to move forward.
Well, excellent. I would like to praise you actually for bringing this agenda so much in the state-owned enterprise. And I think it's, you need to lead by example, and sometimes these small cracks in the system can lead into more rivers of change. And I do hope that this happens, and it makes a perfect segue for us to invite Marina Badrina, who is joining us again from the parliament, but I think now a bit of a quieter space. And thank you so much for taking time in your hectic political life, because I understand life in Ukraine, especially political, is very hectic. So really appreciate it. Marina is the member of parliament from the Sluha Narodu party, which is the governing party of Volodymyr Zelensky. She's the deputy head of Foreign Affairs Committee, but also the head of the subcommittee on Ukraine's international commitments to gender and human rights. I think at some point you were also Volodymyr Zelensky gender representative. I don't know if you still have that function or not, but not anymore, which is a pity, actually, I think. But maybe there's somebody else doing it, so you can tell us. But, I think it's one of the areas, as Natalia mentioned, politics there's a big thick glass ceiling, especially for top positions. But interestingly, Ukraine introduced the gender quotas in the last local elections, and there are some positive outcomes of that. And I'm sure you will tell us both about national and regional politics. So without further ado, Marina, over to you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I should mention that maybe this position of gender advisor to president should become official, finally, because my position in presidential team was unofficial. I'm very sorry because today we have our scheduled session of our parliament. That's why I have some problems with connecting you, but now it's okay. And I'm very happy to be last of the speakers because it's a chance for me to make some comments on previous speeches. First of all, I want to start with positive year because for me as parliamentarian it is the most important to talk about results, achievements of our work. And I want to start with Ukrainian army and women rights in Ukrainian army, because this year, first time in Ukraine, we celebrated rename day of the Ukrainian defenders. And now we make it like gender sensitive, because we rename the date of Ukrainian defense, and it now means both women and men. In Ukrainian, it sounds like День захисників і захисниць. And I should say that it's important from the culture dimension, yeah, because somehow it adopted people to the idea that women as well as men can take weapon and defend our territorial integrity and sovereignty. That's why it's important. We also registered numerous legislation, draft laws in the parliament about equality in Ukrainian army, thanks to the NGOs, to veterans movement. And I should say to Adriana especially that I assess all people who is veterans as people who today can be leaders of these changes in Ukrainian army, because generally I assess the situation in Ukraine as opportunity window, yeah. And these draft laws, which is now signed up in the parliament, they are all about such changes, because we really understand that war in Ukraine leads to the increasing of women in Ukrainian army. And of course, for me as young parliamentarian, for women who participate in armed conflict, we all today are ready to do steps and make better conditions for women in Ukrainian army. That's why I just ask you to be involved and advocate these changes. Coming back to the parliament generally, really this is first time when we have the biggest number of women in Ukrainian parliament. 20% of parliamentarians are female, and for us it's important because it's a chance to advocate our agenda, to advocate changes important for women. We started from electoral code. We really supported 40% gender quota for national elections and a little bit more, but it depends on population in different communities, on local elections. And last local elections, they were held according to this quota, and really the representation of women in local councils has raised to 30%. So it works, and it is an effective tool for us support women in political life. We also work as party with our women, female deputies in different councils, parliament, local councils, with our candidates who weren't elected as deputies, but still we organize a party female wing and make a structure across Ukraine. In every region, we have leaders of our movement, and we are responsible not only like for party support here, but for realization of gender policy everywhere in country. Today, I should say that we are good supported by our First Lady, Olena Zelenska, and she initiated the joining of Ukraine to the Biarritz partnership is like gender initiative of G7. And we like take 5 responsibilities, 5 directions of responsibilities. It is the fight against domestic violence, equality in education, equality in economy, about what Natalia mentioned today. We are working on accessibility for people with for disabled people, and We also work on responsible parenthood, or sometimes I call it fatherhood. And our Ukrainian government created appropriate plan how to implement all these steps in our national policy, and at the same time we involve women in regions to implement the program. Parliament just voted for some legislative initiatives to implement this document. First of all, we started with the policy of responsible fatherhood, and in Parliament voted a law about paternity leave. So today, every man in Ukraine have possibility to take 2 weeks parent leave after childbirth. During first 3 months after childbirth, and it works. Really, many men and their wives contact me and say that we successfully use this ability, but still. But other issues also proposed by this law. For example, additional 10 days leave every day, 10 days leave for dads who have 2 children. Before it was only for women. And some additional equal opportunities for men, which women have before. We're also working on this 3-year childcare leave. Now men also can take it. Before it was women who can be the first who take this 3-year childcare leave, but now men have the same rights. And we now thinking about the general reform of this childcare leave, because it's unfortunately no paid in Ukraine, and this is like too long to be used, for example, only by women or only by men. And these short paternity leaves I mentioned before, they are paid, and this is important to popularize such leaves among men generally. Next step Ukrainian Parliament did is we voted for law against sexism in advertisement. It is popular in Ukraine when some products or services, they are advertised with picturing female bodies, some special like logos for such advertisement, and we are thinking that it is about discrimination, and such practices should be outrooted. So Parliament supported it, and today we also have a good practice. I mean, how to avoid it, or how to how to react from state side on such cases. Next law we supported in Parliament is domestic violence dimension. I mean, we voted a law which makes court, which makes easier for court to go across such cases in courts. And we also make some like additional liability responsibility for people who make domestic violence. But still we are working on the programs how to prevent, how to work with people who commit this domestic violence. So it's like our next steps should be taken. It's first time in Ukraine when from state budget we put 9 million euro for shelters across the country for people who suffered from domestic violence. We are now on our way to advocate the ratification of Istanbul Convention. It's also important, and one of challenges from Ukraine, key challenges I mean now, because of different attitudes in Ukrainian society to this document. but still we are on our way to ratify it. We hope to do it. So it's not maybe about like mainstreaming in budget process, but it's our first important steps which were done this year. I also want to say that Ukraine raised some positive initiatives in international platform. It's first year when we made a Kyiv summit of first ladies and first gentlemen. Also, Olena Zelenska initiated such event, and we will do it every year. We also hope to make some propositions how create the Institute of First Lady, because still in different countries in the world, it's not popular enough, it's not documented enough to be like a separate institute, which also can be involved in state policy. We also, as delegates from Ukraine to Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, raise issues of parliament's inclusiveness, of family-friendly policies in different countries. That's why I should say that Ukraine is active enough in like proposing the agenda of gender equality in the world, and continue to implement different positive practices in Ukraine. And now I see this political will to do such steps. That's why I just ask everyone to be active, to communicate such changes, because we really usually lack of resources, I mean human resources, to prepare such laws, to advocate them among colleagues, but still we have successful cases, and I suppose that it shows that Ukrainian parliament is able to do it, to make changes. Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you very much, Marina. Thanks for taking time. I don't know how long you can stay with us, but if there will be any questions addressed directly to you or for later comments, we would love to. We're still running for another 30 minutes, this discussion. So if you can stay with us, that's great. And just for comparative, prism, in 1991, there were only 2.5% Ukrainian women members of parliament. And today we have 20%. And at the local level, which is interesting, because whenever you have resources coming to the local level, which means money, suddenly it became more interesting for males to be members of local councils, which, thanks to this gender quotas, I think we still have an increase, like you've mentioned, almost 30%, which is almost twofold increased compared to 2015. So that's kind of good news in that way. So I would like now to move over to questions, and all our participants are welcome to raise their hands. We're always happy to hear from you, so don't be shy, not just going in the typing your questions. We'd love to also engage with you in a conversation. If you would like to share any feedback, any advice for Ukraine's, uphill struggle with gender equality, please do so. Just raise your hands and we will unmute you and give you a floor. But meanwhile, I have a question here from Janet Gunn, who is asking our excellent speakers if they find that they get support in the field of education, and are female role models welcome in schools, so as to encourage both girls and boys to think in terms of future equality in their professional life and opportunities. Maybe I'll ask each of you to comment 1 or 2 minutes on this question, because I think it's the way where we really address these stereotypes. It's through schools, also through families, to be honest. So maybe we'll go in a reverse order. We'll give Marina a floor, and because you may have to leave, and then we'll go to Olena and to Adriana and Natalia.
Thanks for this question, because I mentioned that education sphere is also in our focus, and we understand that main changes should start in schools, in universities, because it's all about our next generations. And for us important adopt them to idea that men and women in Ukrainian society is equal. So we today pay special attention to support the idea that different professions should be chosen by men and women, by girls and boys without any conditions. Here we support the idea of STEM professions for among girls. And we also involved our First Lady in these projects with help of UN departments or UN organizations in Ukraine, and we make like a campaign to support the idea of equal access and chance to choose the profession which is convenient, which is preferable for boys and girls.
Okay, thank you so much. If you don't mind, Olena Suslova, I'll give you the floor last, because I think there's a question that you would be well qualified to answer alongside the gender question, the education. So first we'll go to Adriana, please, and then Natalia. Adriana, yeah. Будь ласка, про школи, освітні.
Переключіть звук. Щодо виховання в сім'ях, то тут все ж таки грає дуже велику роль пострадянське минуле України, як на мене, тому що досі і цього року це було дуже красиво представлено через перейменування свята до Дня захисників і захисниць України, оскільки ми, як громадянське суспільство, часто відповідали, там, коментували, інформаційну політику проводили щодо того, що 14 жовтня, День захисника і захисниць, це не свято хлопчиків, а свято захисників України. І так, насправді, і інші визначні дати, коли ми можемо піднімати цю тему, особливо в школах, особливо в сім'ях, це і Всесвітній день прав жінок 8 березня, яке трактується через пострадянське минуле зовсім не так, як воно повинно трактуватися. І насправді ми, як громадянське суспільство, що ми можемо робити і ми робимо, це ми ходимо в школи і залучаємо дівчат-ветеранок в школи. Дівчата одягають форму, бойові медалі і проводять відкриті уроки для дітей. Діти не знають, хто до них прийде, діти знають, що прийде військовий, і приходять і чоловік, і жінка, і вони проводять такі уроки. І діти задають дуже багато питань, і це те, що ми можемо зробити як громадянське суспільство. Але тут я впевнена, і я підтримую думку, що все починається з школи, з виховання, і потрібно працювати в школі щодо і рівності, і прав людини, і демократичних цінностей в Україні, і інших питань, які важливі. На жаль, реформа освітня, вона також відбувається, і надіємося, що ми також подолаємо ці всі стереотипи в школах, відповідно, від учителів, від сімей і інші. Дякую.
Дякую. Natalia, how do you see the role models, whether this could be also more systematically integrated within education? Do you see any good examples of this is happening or not?
I would first say that when we're talking about education, it's not only starting from school, it's even starting from preschool or kindergarten. Because a lot of stereotypes are being formed at the very young age. And even if we look at Ukrainian educational system and the teachers that we have, the percentage of female teachers is far more advanced, and it's not even like, 60%, it's even more. The percentage of actually men working as teachers in Ukrainian school is very low. And actually it's again the part of the stereotype agenda that like teachers is a profession for women, because it's like not so difficult and whatever. Also, I understand that that's not a problem only in Ukraine, But I was lucky to spend a year doing my fellowship at Stanford, and my kids went to public schools there. And percentage of teachers being men at schools there is much higher than what we face in Ukraine. And actually stereotypes then come from, you know, like even from the school. Definitely the led by example cases where you invite the role models into school work both for boys and girls, because then, you know, like it's not only important for girls to understand that they can be successful, it's also important to have men, you know, like supporting and helping them with housework, supporting their actually movement forward, supporting their daughters in their aspiration and in their path of trying different types of professions or different types of entrepreneurial activity as they would do. So I believe that education is very important. And I believe that education, not only in schools, but also at the universities, because even at the universities, you can still influence the young people, but also education, even after graduation, the professional education could be helpful, because there are a lot of people that wants to change something, that want to do something in their companies, in terms of women empowerment or in their communities, but they do not know what are the mechanisms or the tools that they can use, you know, like the most efficient tools and mechanisms that they should use or can use in order to achieve this more gender equality in terms of economy and more successful women in business and in profession. So I'm a big believer in education, and I'm a big believer in lifetime learning. And I think that's, I'm still learning a lot about women economic empowerment myself and on the tools that we can use. But I really want to stress once again that we need to engage men into this discussion. For example, in Ukr in the company that I'm sitting at the board, the person that is responsible for women economic empowerment is a great man, gentleman, Alexander Formaguet. He is present here at our discussion, and he is actually pushing this agenda forward. And I think that was a very wise executive decision by our CEO to appoint a man to push this agenda rather than to appoint a woman to push the agenda of women economic empowerment, because it's also the great example for other men in the company to support this agenda and to understand that it's not only, you know, like girls work for girls, or, you know, like women work for women agenda and stuff. Thank you.
Well, Natalia, you're making excellent point about this not being just the women's problem, gender. And, you know, I absolutely failed in my panel. Next time I'll invite Alexander, you know, to speak. I'm sorry, but I think you make a very important point. That's why, because my boss is a man, nothing of that sort with prejudices and stereotypes, but James Nixie, his question is actually related to the one on education. And that's why I would like to combine them together and then come back to you, Elena, too, because we are adding a bit more layers to you regarding educational. James.
Thank you, Arisia. First of all, to say to everybody, I don't regard myself as Arisia's boss, and I make a point of not interfering on the Ukraine forum because people involved with Russia should not be interfering with Ukraine as a broader statement. But the first, my question, which was probably too lengthy, which is why Arisia has invited me in, was to ask, I'm not very well versed in these things, but how does, sorry, you probably can't hear me very well. Yeah, maybe that's better. How does, I don't really understand how these things start and how they flow through the generations. I can make guesses, but presumably the source is where you need to apply the first priorities. So I can imagine it's a very much a familial thing as well as what you receive from media and social media, and therefore that would be an indication of where you need to attack first. So that's my first question, is because everybody has to have priorities in their professional lives. Where do you go first? What's the most important thing to do? And the second question, if I may, I just assume, because I understand this to be the case in other places, that the problem doesn't solely reside with men, that you have to do quite a lot of convincing of women as well. But maybe I'm wrong, and if you could just answer, just take that point as well, I'd be interested. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, James. So Olena, there's a set of questions related to how do you target and where do you target this intervention. There was a question from Yulia, who was asking about civicus, actually more kind of civic education, whether gender is part and what is happening in Ukrainian schools. And how do you actually measure? That's another question. How do you measure the impact of our interventions? What could be the metrics? So over to you.
Actually, I'm not so optimistic as some my colleagues what talked about situation in education, and I think, and I'm absolutely agree with all these concerns. However, political campaigns are good, but we have more systemic problems in this area. The concept of strategy of gender equality in education was being discussed during years and years and never was being approved. It was being not approved, not because it had some faults in technical things or other. It was being not approved because the impact, influence of religious groups and religious organizations. Despite under the constitution, the church and state are separated, and education in schools is a privilege of the state. Actually, it is not. And from time to time, we have to struggle very hard with different kind of manuals, with different kind of additional didactical materials. What really, what we talked already, they introduce and they try to bring to every single class the problem of misogyny, sexism, and role models of old-fashioned things that actually do not exist in families very often, do not exist in society. In many schools still now, practical skills related to different areas that usually children have to receive are separated for girls and boys. Could you tell me what will be for boys? Not cooking. Mm-hmm. It will be something in very male area. What will be for girls? Again. And it is a really big problem. Talking about kindergartens, preschool education, it is much more difficult, much more harder. And unfortunately, I do not see now some tendencies that could change the situation. Olena Masalitina, who is very well known, I also would like to join campaign what Natalia said and tell about great women. Olena Masalitina, who worked as a gender advisor in the Ministry of Education, she left it because no space for this area. And it is not just about gender. It is about more broader concepts about non-discrimination, about tolerance, about not bullying, about not stigma. Therefore, I think it is really one of the areas that we have to pay attention much more and to be more sharp.
Thank you very much. I'd like to bring in two of our participants in the call who raised their hands. First, Oksana Potapova, if you can introduce yourself, and then Olesya.
To be in your company, and great to see you again, many of you. I'm Oksana Potapova. I'm a Ukrainian activist as well, and a recent graduate of a program in gender studies in London. And it's a privilege for me to actually kind of speak from both locations. I want to support a lot of the issues that my colleagues have already raised regarding the multifaceted barriers, both in terms of culture and structural barriers And one additional comment I would like to make before I pose my question is that I've heard quite a lot of comments today referring back to Soviet time problems. And I want to challenge that a little bit and to say that, of course, on the level of cultural and stereotypical relations, we have a lot to uncover. But on the structural level, we have to remember that, for example, infrastructure was much better during Soviet times, including access to kindergartens, because there was an impetus to include women in the job market as equal participants. And it's important to talk about the fact that now this is being rolled back by some of the neoliberal reforms that are happening in Ukraine, and including decentralization, that has positive aspects, but it is leading to very, very low salaries of women who work in pre-school care. There is a great project I want to mention, maybe some of you will be interested in looking more up. In Ukrainian, it's called Хто потурбується, and in English, I like to translate it as Who Cares, because it's an analysis of the situation of labor market of women who work in pre-school facilities, how much they receive, what is the volume of children they deal with. So this kind of leads to my question to about whether this issue of, actually it's a structural issue, it's not an individual or cultural thing. It's very difficult for women who are directly responsible for caring for children or for promoting equality and empowerment, who live and work in very precarious situation, whether it has been already brought to the attention of our high-level decision makers in terms of the need for restructuring and improving working conditions. And my second question also relates to the issue of education, and it's to all of the panelists who want to answer it. I fully agree with the unfortunate role of the Council of Churches on the educational sector, as well as their unfortunate stallment of the Istanbul Convention ratification. So again, I don't think it's fair to say that all of the roots of the problems only go to Soviet Union. Yeah. We have today, unfortunately, quite a lot of challenges coming from religious people. Some of them are in parliament. Some of them also have a very strong parliamentary caucuses. So maybe, but then I can also comment on how we together can work towards actually kind of keeping and preserving our right as women, as citizens, as the rights of girls and boys. And one other aspect, apart from
I'm so
gender
sorry,
standards,
I have
overall,
to interrupt
is,
you. I'm so sorry because I have to interrupt you because because your quality of your connection is not very good, and we need to move on. You already asked a lot of questions, so sorry.
I wanted to say that it's about sexual education. That's it. Where it could be possible to have access to it as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You've raised a lot of issues. Unfortunately, Marina has already left because she had to go in the chamber because there is some proceedings going on. But I'm sure that Olena Suslova will be able to address some of those issues on the Council of Churches and what could be done, and maybe whoever else wants to contribute. But now I'd like to give a floor to Olesa Hrumychuk. Are you still there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, Orisa. So my name is Olesa Hrumychuk. I'm a historian and I work on questions of gender and militarization. My question is to Andriana, really, but perhaps to others too. So the Invisible Battalion produced several sociological studies as well as developed a massive advocacy campaign, as you already mentioned today. And the latest sociological study was on sexual harassment in the armed forces. My question is very simple and practical. How seriously are these very important findings being taken by the army command and by the state? I can repeat this in Ukrainian if you want.
No, it's okay. Adriana has translation, so that's not necessary.
Adriana.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll go first to Olena, and then we'll go to Adriana.
Thank you, Oksana. Actually, you not only asked, but answered at your question, and I'm agree with you. It is a structural problem, and therefore I said about strategy of gender equality in education. Because if we try to reform any kind of field, we have to see at least two parts. We have to see at the programmatic area. So what kind of services, for example, schools will give to the children. And also we have to see at the institution as well. what kind of rules will rule in institution. If the Council of Churches, it will be one school. If it will be a rule of law, if it will be any kind of commitments, Ukraine has a lot of international commitments, what could create excellent approach to this system, it will be another thing. My lack of optimism, because in general, I'm optimist. Now it is because I do not see political will to do it. Actually, leaders don't like to have the game with church, because they think it could be very bad for their political future. We try to do it, and we have to concentrate much more, not only at campaigns and some separate actions, but we have to concentrate at more structural changes in this area.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's important to understand that in Ukraine, church has very high levels of social trust. If you look at which institutions are trusted, so you could see that church is a giant compared to institutions of presidency or even the parliament, and that also creates the disparity in relations, and I guess the leverage that some of these, and also there are different churches in Ukraine, because Ukraine is very diverse in its religious constellation. So now, Adriana, you would probably have to switch into interpretation, ladies and gentlemen. Adriana, over to you. How seriously?
Yeah, I will try to be brief, commenting on the findings of our research and to comment a bit about the role of the Council of Churches. Churches and church communities that put up resistance to gender education and the ratification of the Istanbul Convention in Ukraine, I think is exacerbated by the media in Ukraine. Money is very influential. Russian money is very influential, and they impact the information space in Ukraine. People consume low quality information products. In Ukraine today, when it comes to access to the internet at the regional level, at the local level, more people still consume media through television, and the main channels, TV channels, are pro-oligarchical. Some of them are pro-Russian, and they are sending such messages as swapping women or wives, then the role of a woman in the family, or say what mother is a good mother and what mother is a bad mother, and how we can swap them. I think that the fight against this inequality is akin to fight against corruption. It takes time and a lot of effort, and we have to educate the population at large, raising their awareness so that the civil society acts very proactively, and now it is not the case. If we have got a critical mass of citizens and civil society organizations that promote democratic changes in Ukraine, only then will we be successful. As far as our survey of the Invisible Battalion on sexual harassment in the armed forces of Ukraine is concerned, I participated as a consultant in that survey because the veteran movement amongst women is very proactive in this area. And we focus on reproductive health in the armed forces of Ukraine for both women and men. But as far as this very survey is concerned, we could not actually organize offline meetings to disseminate the findings of that survey. As a result, there wasn't very broad publicity of the outcomes. Nonetheless, the Institute of Gender Programs has a platform where service women can apply, and they've got a chatbot on this platform, which can be used by all interested parties. We also have the Gender Caucus in Parliament, and we cooperate with them very actively, and they contribute also. And this chatbot will be also open to the general staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and in this way is the information exchange made possible. So, and we underscore the need for systemic changes, and it concerns criminal legislation, civic legislation, and we actually share cases with people in this chatbot. Such cases as single as the coach are very high profile cases, and the situation with the legislation as it is today disallows us to hold commanders who are guilty of sexual harassment accountable. So, and it is about sexual harassment against women and men alike. And the Ministry of Defense communicated with the civil society that we haven't got any such cases. That there were only 5 such cases of sexual violence or gender-based violence in the armed forces. And what the Invisible Battalion did was to demonstrate that those cases are rough. And there can be verbal violence, there can be gender-based violence, there can be bullying, again, based on gender motives. And since we've got this chatbot, we can interact with the Ministry of Defense, with the General Staff, and with the Parliament. And we make recommendations to decision makers in the Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defense. But the topic is still a taboo to a great extent.
Every time we start talking about justice, we end up with this, overarching impunity in Ukraine, why it's so difficult because of the unreformed courts. So we promise that we will keep rule of law very high on our agenda here, the Ukraine Forum and Chatham House. And before we close our discussion today, we have a couple of minutes. I'd like to ask the last question to Natalia Mikolska, because you're working across different sectors, mostly, of course, private sector, but other good examples of coordination of efforts, companies, civil society, funders, from your area of expertise, and what are some of the challenges where people, bring their forces together? Because there are many also private foundations in Ukraine, companies doing corporate social responsibility. Do you see a nice fusion in some areas where this cooperation brings results? And if not, how can we improve it?
Thank you for your question. I think that although women economic empowerment is becoming a more important issue on the agenda of the private sector, it's still unfortunately not even in like top 10 issues that Ukrainian companies are considering or working on. But it's moving, and it's also moving especially for the companies that are working with foreign investors or that are exporting. Usually in Ukraine, those companies are most advanced in terms of implementing the best practices from the world. And actually, Ukrainian exporters sometimes are being pushed by their foreign counterparties to implement the gender equality policy in their companies. Especially, I will just share with you one example that we actually faced here with the Ukrainian companies that were doing business with Canadian counterparts. We were doing a lot of programs with She Experts when I was a trade representative at Deputy Minister, and a lot of Ukrainians, a number of Ukrainian IT companies, like 6 years, I believe, ago, some of them were just, like not laughing, but they were not really serious about, they were like, what are you doing? You're doing, like some stuff that is only like related for women, like what it has to do with our business. We are doing outsourcing and it has nothing to do with us. And then certainly one of their, like potential big client from Canada requested them to provide the data about women being employed at top level of their company, plus the gender related policies, because that was the part of the company's code of conduct. And they were hiring only the companies that had certain percentage of women on the top level of their actually counterparties, or the company that they outsource their work. And that implemented the gender policy basically in their daily work. So I think that this soft push, by industry leaders to other companies in terms of, like procuring, like giving preferences in terms of procuring services from women-owned or women-led businesses, providing some, requesting the implementation of gender policies might be a great example of how we can also push this agenda forward. Sometimes I believe that there should be some push, out from outside, that in case, like that should be well received inside, because we understand that if the company actually doesn't believe in that, and then we have only the outside push, it will not be actually implemented. We will have these codes, but they will not be followed, or the company will not spend its resources on actually advancing these policies, because policies, we know that policies might be dead, after months after they adopted, if either there is no resources, and it's not only about finances, but it's also about people implementing and leading these changes, but it's also about energy thrown into the implementation of this policy from the top level to bottom, down. And that's a very very important issue for me. And actually we do have a number of Ukrainian companies that already implemented this internal code of conduct and internal procurement procedure, that they procured at least like 50%, doing procurement of at least 50% of the goods and services that they procure from women-led or women-owned businesses, or women or businesses that employs more than like 50% on the top level. And a lot of them are now giving it, like talking proudly about that.
Okay.
So it's not only just like implement something, but it's also like to say loud, say, look, we are doing it and we believe in that. And that's are the changes that this policy brought to our company, because people need to see policy, they need to see implementation, plus they need to see the results, what this policy brought.
Excellent. I think it's telling our discussion. I almost feel regret that we didn't structure it by sector, but I think I'll make a commitment as a head of Ukraine Forum to have a deeper dive into gender dimensions across different spheres of Ukraine, because I'm sure we have touched and given maybe like a taster session about what we could be talking about when we are talking about gender, and the questions that we could be raising. So I would like to thank all of you, Olena, Adriana.
I'm sorry. I found
just 1 second, because we are way beyond time, so we have to wrap up.
We missed one question.
Yes, go ahead.
Fida Shpur about metrics, and I would like to
go
tell
ahead.
that we have a lot to do in this area, because sex differentiated statistic is very low, poor yet in Ukraine.
And if you are happy, I can share the contact with whoever asked the question, and you can provide more information. Maybe that's what we can do as well. So thank you so much again for contributing, for taking your time. And I would like to especially thank our voiceover that was doing interpretation, Irina Inozemtseva. And just to say that we'll also be sending a very quick survey to all of you who attended today, just to understand whether this conversation was useful and what you would like to see more in the future. Дуже дякую всім, гарного дня, all the best, and take good care of yourself. Thank you so much.